I think this is notable because of the audience. He was telling a lot of lies, saying a lot of other inaccurate things, regardless of his intentions, to the U.S.'s top military leaders. So I want you to listen to something he said about former President Joe Biden.
I go around bragging about that. I said, we have the strongest military anywhere in the world. I say it. You never heard Biden say that. You never heard him say anything.
Take a moment and really sit with what happened here, because this wasn't supposed to be complicated. This was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to be one of those moments that runs on autopilot. A friendly crowd, a friendly venue, a conference literally designed to deliver applause on cue. And instead, what unfolded felt tense, awkward, and strangely revealing in a way that's hard to ignore if you followed conservative politics for any length of time. The reaction Donald Trump received at CPAC this time didn't look like the CPAC people have grown accustomed to.
Biden said that over and over. This took me about 5 seconds to find on Google. One sample quote from 2023. Our U.S. military, and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world, not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. So this is just one of many such quotes.
And that difference is where the real story lives. Before you even get to the conference itself, there's some important context that's easy to gloss over but matters a lot. Just days earlier, Trump had addressed senior U.S. military officers at Quantico. CNN aired portions of that speech and immediately brought in Daniel Dale, their fact-checker, who was unusually blunt. He said the speech contained a staggering number of false claims. What stood out wasn't just the inaccuracies themselves, but who Trump was speaking to. This wasn't a rally crowd or a partisan audience. It was senior military leadership.
If you want to do anything you want, you can do anything you want. And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank, there goes your future. We went, in a way, woke. That was probably the first sign of wokeness. And we changed it to defense instead of war. And I said, what do you think? How do you think if we changed it back? Would that be a nice idea?
That clip spread quickly online. Supporters waved it off as media bias. Critics argued it showed a deeper pattern. Either way, it set the tone going into CPAC. Now fast forward to the conference itself. CPAC isn't just another political event. It's the Conservative Political Action Conference, a gathering that attracts activists, donors, influencers, elected officials, and some of the most committed conservative voters in the country. These aren't undecided voters. These aren't casual observers. These are people willing to travel, spend money, and sit through long days of speeches because conservative politics matters deeply to them. So when Trump took the stage for his keynote, the expectation among allies was straightforward. Fire up the base. Project dominance. Reinforce the idea that he's still the central force in conservative politics. But according to numerous accounts from inside the room and the flood of reaction afterward, that's not how it played out. The speech moved quickly into one of Trump's favorite policy defenses, tariffs. He argued they were a win, that they were good for America, that they showed strength.
A gentleman came in, a financial guy. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, we don't know where it came. I said, check the tariff shelf. No, sir, the tariffs haven't started in that sector yet. I said, yes, they have. They started 7 weeks ago. Check it. Comes back 20 minutes later. Sir, you're right. It came from tariffs. $31 billion.
On paper, tariffs can sound abstract, like a technical trade tool, but CPAC's audience isn't made up solely of pundits and politicians. It includes small business owners, contractors, manufacturers, people who live close to supply chains and feel price increases directly. For them, tariffs don't feel theoretical. They feel like higher costs, thinner margins, and pressure that gets passed down.
One of the first executive orders I signed upon taking office was to restore the principle of merit. That's the most important word. Other than the word tariff. I love tariffs. Most beautiful word. But I'm not allowed to say that anymore. I said tariff is my favorite word. I love the word tariff. You know, we're becoming rich as hell.
As Trump leaned into defending tariffs, people in the room reportedly began reacting audibly. At first, it wasn't shouting or booing. It was discomfort, groans, the kind of sound that signals disagreement without spectacle. Then it escalated. chants reportedly broke out, including no more taxes. From the audience's point of view, tariffs function like taxes. They raise prices. They don't disappear. From Trump's point of view, tariffs are leverage and protection. That gap in perspective is where the tension really took hold. Instead of pivoting, Trump doubled down.
But I tell you, it's what we're doing is so good, and we deserve it. You know, we help other countries with it. We don't have it ourselves. And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free.
And when the reaction didn't soften, he lashed out. He suggested critics in the room were fake, implied they were planted, and muttered about rhinos, Republicans in name only. That was the moment many observers say something snapped. When a politician tells his own audience they don't belong, especially at their own conference, it changes the dynamic instantly.
They're Democrats. They never do. Not only are we rebuilding our great strength, but for the first time in years, my administration is actually using that strength to defend the core and vital interests of America. And very simply, we are putting America first. And I have since I've been elected. I've always put America first.
Even people who broadly support you don't like being dismissed or insulted in their own space. Not long after that, videos began circulating online showing people standing up and leaving. The numbers varied wildly depending on who you asked. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. The exact figure almost doesn't matter. What mattered was the visual itself. People walking out during a Trump keynote at CPAC. That alone was enough to ignite social media. Reaction was immediate and intense. Conservative influencers commented in real time. Liberal commentators seized on the footage. Clips were slowed down, zoomed in, reposted, analyzed from every angle. Laura Loomer, a well-known MAGA activist who was there, posted that Trump had lost the room. That comment carried weight precisely because it came from inside the movement. Criticism from opponents is easy to dismiss. Criticism from your own side hits differently. It introduces doubt. It forces people to acknowledge that something feels off. At the same time, renewed attention surfaced around an old Trump promise involving $2,000 checks supposedly tied to tariff revenue. Economists had long said there was no clear legal mechanism for that idea, and the checks never materialized. When Trump referenced related themes in the speech, that promise resurfaced in people's minds. Broken promises don't fade away. They wait, and when the right moment comes, they reappear with force. Many online reactions suggested that was the emotional tipping point. Not just disagreement over policy, but the feeling of being talked down to about something people experience directly in their wallets. There was also discussion about CPAC attendance itself. Some analysts noted that turnout appeared lower than peak years. Others argued it was simply post-pandemic normalization. Either way, optics matter. A smaller room magnifies everything. Every groan sounds louder. Every exit looks more dramatic. Every negative reaction feels heavier. Zooming out, it's clear this moment didn't happen in isolation. Trump has been under sustained legal, financial, and political pressure, court cases, appeals, asset disputes, bond issues, constant headlines. Even supporters who dismiss individual stories can feel the cumulative weight over time. From what many observers saw, CPAC became a release valve. Months of frustration bubbling up all at once, and Trump's response, blaming, dismissing, attacking, only sharpened that frustration instead of easing it. This is where the story shifts from a bad speech to something more significant. CPAC attendees are not persuadable swing voters. They are the base. If skepticism appears there, it doesn't mean Trump is finished, but it does suggest the coalition is more fragile than it looks from the outside. Democratic strategists noticed immediately. Clips circulated with captions emphasizing backlash on home turf. Whether those narratives are fair or exaggerated, they're effective. Politics is visual, and the visuals here weren't flattering. Donors pay attention to moments like this too, not because of a single reaction, but because it hints at enthusiasm, momentum, and energy. Those things matter when deciding where money goes. Republican leaders are watching as well. Some will dismiss the moment outright. Others will quietly take notes. Parties don't abandon leaders overnight, but they do plan for contingencies. They start thinking about what happens if enthusiasm dips or loyalty becomes conditional. And that's the part that really changes the lens. Trump's strength has always been emotional connection, the sense that he understands his supporters and fights for them. When that bond weakens even slightly, the relationship changes. Loyalty becomes conditional. Rallies become negotiations. Support becomes something that has to be maintained rather than assumed. Looking ahead to the 2026 midterms, this matters. At minimum, Republicans can't assume automatic enthusiasm. Candidates in swing districts may need to distance themselves more carefully. Messaging becomes more cautious. Fundraising gets harder. Turnout becomes less predictable. For Democrats, moments like this are opportunities, not guarantees, but openings. The CPAC moment will be replayed, debated, reframed, and argued over endlessly. Supporters will defend it. Critics will amplify it. But beneath all of that, the underlying signal remains. Something cracked in a place that once felt unshakable. That doesn't mean a movement collapses overnight. Politics rarely works that way. It frays, it strains, it shows itself in moments like this, when applause turns uneven, when loyalty becomes conditional, when the room doesn't respond the way it used to. There's another angle to this that's easy to miss if you only focus on the clips and the walkouts, and it has less to do with Trump himself and more to do with how movements age. What happened at CPAC wasn't just a reaction to one policy or one tone-deaf moment. It looked like the friction that builds when a political coalition starts to feel taken for granted. For years, Trump's relationship with his base has been built on a simple emotional exchange. He performs defiance, they reward him with loyalty. He attacks institutions they distrust, they cheer. That feedback loop has been incredibly powerful. But loops like that depend on constant reinforcement. When supporters start to feel like they're the ones being scolded, dismissed, or blamed, the energy flips direction. And that's what made this moment so uncomfortable to watch. The frustration in the room didn't come from nowhere. Many of the people sitting there have defended Trump through indictments, impeachments, lawsuits, and nonstop negative coverage. They've absorbed costs socially, professionally, and sometimes financially for sticking with him. When those same people hear a defense of tariffs that they believe are actively hurting them and then get labeled disloyal for pushing back, it creates a kind of emotional whiplash. That's not rebellion, that's fatigue. You could see it in how the reactions unfolded. This wasn't an angry crowd looking to overthrow him. It was a weary crowd signaling for once that they wanted to be heard instead of talked over. Groans before boos, standing up before shouting, walking out instead of throwing things. That matters. It suggests disengagement more than outrage, and disengagement is far more dangerous politically. Outrage can be redirected. Disengagement just drains away. Another important detail is how quickly the narrative escaped Trump's control. For most of his political career, moments like this would get drowned out by counter-programming. A new controversy, a new enemy, a new viral moment that recenters attention on his terms. This time, that didn't quite happen. The clips lingered, the commentary lingered, even supportive voices found themselves explaining rather than celebrating. That shift from offense to defense is subtle, but it's real, and it feeds into a broader pattern. Trump's messaging has increasingly relied on grievance and combat, but less on persuasion. That works when the audience feels aligned against a common enemy. It works less well when the friction is internal. Calling your own supporters fake or planted doesn't mobilize them. It alienates them. Even if they don't leave the movement, it changes how enthusiastically they participate. This is where the donor and activist layer becomes critical. Movements don't just run on votes. They run on volunteers, organizers, fundraisers, and small-dollar contributors who feel emotionally invested. If those people start to feel unappreciated or dismissed, the machinery slows down. Not dramatically, quietly, and quietly is how campaigns lose momentum without realizing it until it's too late. There's also a generational element at play. CPAC has been trying to attract younger conservatives for years, and tariffs, trade wars, and economic instability hit that group particularly hard. Younger attendees are more likely to be renters, gig workers, small entrepreneurs, or employees without pricing power. When economic policies feel like they're squeezing opportunity rather than protecting it, the patience wears thin faster. That doesn't turn them into Democrats, but it does make them less automatic in their loyalty. All of this explains why the CPAC moment resonated far beyond that room. It wasn't just Trump gets booed, it was Trump doesn't fully control the room anymore. And that's a meaningful distinction. Control doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes at the edges. It shows up in hesitation, mixed reactions, conditional applause. Political power is often measured not by how loudly people cheer, but by how afraid they are to stop cheering. CPAC used to feel like a place where stopping felt unthinkable. This time, people stopped. That's the warning sign. It doesn't mean Trump can't win elections. It doesn't mean the movement collapses. But it does mean the dynamic is changing. The base is no longer just absorbing messages. It's reacting, evaluating, pushing back. And once that happens, every future appearance becomes more fragile. Going forward, this puts Trump in a difficult position. He can double down, demand loyalty, and frame dissent as betrayal, or he can recalibrate and try to rebuild that emotional connection. The first path hardens the core but shrinks it. The second risks showing vulnerability, something he has always resisted. Either way, the era of effortless applause looks like it may be over. And in politics, when the room starts thinking for itself instead of echoing, that's when real change becomes possible. There's a final implication here that hasn't really sunk in yet, and it's the one that could matter most over the next 2 years. Moments like this don't just affect how a leader is perceived, they change how everyone else behaves around that leader. When a political figure dominates a movement, people orbit them carefully. They repeat talking points, avoid public disagreement, and suppress doubts because dissent feels risky. But once a visible crack appears in a safe environment, especially one as insulated as CPAC, the risk calculus changes. If people can push back there, they can push back elsewhere. That's when you start seeing micro shifts that don't make headlines but quietly reshape the landscape. Candidates start hedging their language. Instead of Trump says, it becomes many conservatives believe. Endorsements come later with more conditions. Fundraising emails soften the absolutism and lean harder on local issues. Operatives begin building parallel narratives that can survive whether Trump leads the ticket or not. None of this looks dramatic in isolation, but together it signals preparation. Preparation for uncertainty. And uncertainty is the enemy of political dominance. For a long time, Trump's greatest strength was predictability of support. You could count on the base to rally, defend, and amplify. That certainty allowed him to absorb shocks that would have destroyed other politicians. Legal trouble, scandals, controversial statements, even electoral losses didn't sever the bond. But predictability depends on trust. Not blind trust, but relational trust, the feeling that the leader is fighting with you, not just demanding loyalty from you. CPAC suggested that some supporters are starting to ask a quiet but dangerous question. Does he still see us? That question doesn't get shouted, it gets internalized. And once it's there, it changes behavior long before it changes votes. You can already see how this might ripple outward. Conservative media, which once treated Trump appearances as guaranteed ratings wins, now dissect moments more cautiously. Hosts hedge. Commentary becomes explanatory instead of celebratory. Influencers who built brands on unwavering loyalty suddenly find themselves explaining why criticism doesn't mean betrayal. That's cognitive dissonance creeping in. Even attacks don't land the same way anymore. When Trump lashes out at critics, the old rally effect depends on the audience identifying the critic as an outsider. But when the tension comes from inside the room, the attack feels misdirected. It creates discomfort instead of unity. That's a subtle but profound shift. And here's the paradox Trump now faces. His instinct historically has been to tighten the circle, reward loyalty, punish dissent, and dare people to leave. That strategy can work in short bursts. It energizes the most committed supporters. But over time, it narrows the coalition. It trades breadth for intensity. In midterms, intensity matters, but only up to a point. You still need turnout beyond the hardest core. You still need people who are enthusiastic enough to show up, but not so ideologically rigid that they scare off moderates. If enthusiasm turns conditional, turnout becomes volatile. That's why strategists on both sides are watching this so closely. Not because CPAC decides elections, but because CPAC reveals mood, and mood precedes behavior. Nothing about this guarantees a political collapse. Trump remains a powerful figure with a loyal base and enormous influence. But influence that has to be enforced feels different from influence that flows freely. Once applause becomes uneven, once loyalty needs reminders, once supporters start weighing costs instead of reflexively cheering, the dynamic has changed. That's the real takeaway. This wasn't about tariffs alone. It wasn't about one speech or one reaction. It was about a moment when a room that once echoed started to think. And in politics, thinking crowds are far harder to command than cheering ones.